Former President Trump assumed a handful of posts could silence her, but Representative Jasmine Crockett clapped back with a staggering $100 million lawsuit won that's now shaking the halls of Washington. It all began with a post, or rather, 3 of them blasted out from Donald Trump's official X handle just past 6 a.m. on a Thursday. Within moments, they'd spread like wildfire. The messages called out Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett by name, accusing her of financial corruption, foreign influence, and misusing campaign contributions for lavish personal expenses. The tone was aggressive, and the remarks were intensely personal. One message bluntly claimed, Jasmine Crockett is a con artist, bought and paid for. Dig into her foreign money ties. It's outrageous what she's pulling off. No one's saying a word. What made it even more unsettling was the complete lack of context. No recent spats, no committee disputes, no viral confrontations, nothing that indicated she was even on Trump's radar. Yet here he was, broadcasting serious, unproven allegations to more than 90 million users. No evidence, no links, no reports, just claims. And instantly, speculation over Trump's intent exploded. Within an hour, tags like #CrockettUnmasked and #TrumpAttacks, women began climbing the charts, mirroring both support for and outrage against the president. Screenshots were splashed across major headlines by noon. Conservative sites jumped on the bandwagon, amplifying the narrative without fact-checking, while progressive outlets came to Crockett's aid, questioning the motives behind Trump's sudden attack. But what separated this controversy from the usual was the timing. Crockett had just earned national buzz for her pointed questioning during a televised congressional session grilling a top Trump ally on campaign finance laws. Many viewed the tweets as pure retaliation, a personal blow disguised as political critique. Inside Crockett's office, disbelief gave way to deep alarm in hours. Staffers began receiving hostile emails and even threats. One message, later entered into evidence, warned her to watch your back and accused her of robbing the nation. Capitol Police were notified. Security protocols were overhauled. Crockett canceled a town hall event in her district, citing security risks. For political observers, the attack represented a terrifying new escalation. Sure, elected leaders are used to online criticism, but this was different. These accusations came from the Oval Office itself, lending weight that made even baseless claims seem believable. This wasn't just another tweet. A legal expert said on MSNBC, this was a presidential megaphone pointed directly at a sitting lawmaker with real-life consequences. By day's end, a number of lawmakers, mostly Democrats, condemned the tweets as reckless, dangerous, and unworthy of the presidency. Trump didn't pull back. That evening, he posted again. Crockett's part of the rot dishonest, feeble compromise. I said what I meant. Let's see if the press will actually look into her. No inquiries were launched. No legitimate investigations surfaced. The burden landed squarely on Crockett, and she was ready, not with a press statement, not through social media, but with something that would leave a permanent mark, a federal lawsuit. The aftermath of those first posts flipped Crockett's daily routine into crisis mode. The disruption was immediate, severe, and profoundly personal. Her team, typically focused on district matters and legislative prep, now scrambled to handle a tsunami of aggressive messages not from constituents, but from enraged strangers quoting Trump's exact words. Some labeled her a traitor, others issued threats. One voicemail chillingly said, "You'll get what's coming." By mid-afternoon, U.S. Capitol Police had been contacted again. Security was boosted. Her office had never seen anything like it. The hate wasn't just random, it was coordinated, relentless, and alarming enough to activate high-level congressional security forces. What added to the danger was the certainty behind the threats. Trump's statements weren't dismissed as typical political bluster by his followers. They were accepted as truth. His tweets didn't include sources or evidence, yet they were treated as gospel by many. In her Dallas office, phones rang off the hook. Aides were harassed and verbally attacked. On social platforms, old images of Crockett were twisted into conspiracies and reshared with captions accusing her of being an enemy of the state. Some users falsely claimed she was under federal investigation, an outright lie that nevertheless fueled a runaway narrative Crockett had no control over. Her family wasn't spared. Her mother received a disturbing envelope at her house, hand-labeled and postmarked just a day after the tweets. Inside was a printed letter accusing Jasmine of stealing America's soul, along with a doctored image from a far-right meme. page. It ended with the words, "She'll pay." That evening, Crockett's lawyers had already started gathering evidence. Every call was recorded, each message preserved. A timeline was forming. The threats weren't theoretical, they were real. Her security team even urged her to temporarily vacate her D.C. apartment after someone posted its address under one of Trump's tweets. Behind closed doors, fellow representatives began reaching out. Some sent quiet words of encouragement. A few, especially younger members, worried they could be next. "If he can target Jasmine," one told a reporter anonymously, "what stops him from choosing me?" Yet many remained publicly silent, particularly among Republicans. No one said a thing, whether out of fear or strategy. The quiet was loud. And to Crockett, that silence spoke volumes. Got through all of it. She didn't clap back online. No cryptic posts, no rebuttal videos. She went dark on X for nearly 36 hours. A deliberate move. "Posting won't protect me," she reportedly told her chief of staff. "But I can do something that will." That something was a lawsuit. Her advisors knew outrage would be short-lived, but a legal battle would force the truth to stay. Front and center by the next morning, as threatening messages kept arriving, one longtime aide broke down in tears. An email had come in filled with fake, humiliating images meant to intimidate Crockett. That was it. By Friday afternoon, her legal team had a full outline of their defamation case. Every tweet was filed, every threat logged. The legal theory was simple. Trump used his platform to broadcast knowingly false, reputation-destroying claims with complete disregard for the truth, and triggered very real, dangerous fallout. Crockett didn't want to take the president to court, but as she later explained, "He painted a target on my back with his words. I can't let that go unanswered." This wasn't about partisanship. It was about justice and survival. And Crockett made it clear, no one else was going to fight this battle for her. Crockett was no longer just responding. She was now taking steps to ensure the president faced consequences in court. By Saturday morning, Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett had ended her calculated silence after nearly 48 hours of deliberate restraint. She entered a tightly packed media room in Washington, D.C., accompanied by her legal counsel and two fellow legislators. The mood was tense, focused, and solemn. Crockett didn't smile or wave. She positioned herself behind the lectern, locked eyes with the press corps, and began reading from a written statement. Her voice was calm, her words measured. "Let me make something absolutely clear," she began. "The President of the United States exploited his office and social reach to circulate harmful, slanderous falsehoods about me. Those lies have endangered my life, the safety of my staff, and the well-being of my family. I will not be silent." The room, filled with reporters from across the country, remained still as she presented a timeline. The first tweet, the rapid surge in threats, the suspension of public events, and the involvement of security forces. She avoided exaggeration. She didn't need to. The facts alone were chilling. "I've dedicated my life to service, to defending transparency and accountability," she continued. "What the president did wasn't just reckless, it was a targeted campaign to destroy my character, rooted purely in spite and cruelty." She paused, then turned slightly toward a CNN camera. "He will be held accountable." With that, she stepped aside and let her lead attorney take over. In a composed and formal tone, her lawyer confirmed that very morning, the Congresswoman had initiated a civil defamation lawsuit in federal court. The legal complaint asserted that Donald Trump intentionally issued untrue and damaging claims about Crockett's statements that triggered threats and damaged her public image. But the centerpiece of the argument wasn't just that the tweets were hurtful, it was that they were presented as facts, coming from the most influential political voice in the nation. And because they were false and issued with knowledge of their falsity, they satisfied the legal definition of actual malice. The press event lasted slightly over 17 minutes. Crockett didn't respond to questions. As she exited, she offered a curt nod to reporters and slipped out through a side entrance. But the statement she delivered was already sparking headlines coast to coast. That afternoon, every major broadcaster replayed her remarks. MSNBC aired the entire segment. CNN hosted a panel dissecting the legal strength of her filing. Even Fox News, generally aligned with Trump, aired a low-key segment, acknowledging that the tweets were baseless and could present a genuine legal risk for the former president. Behind the scenes, Crockett's team began hearing from unlikely allies, ex-prosecutors, civil liberties attorneys, even a few Republican-leaning legal experts quietly conceded that her case was solid. On the internet, the narrative began to evolve. While many of Trump's loyalists dug in, a growing number of moderates and independent voters questioned the rationale behind attacking a relatively new member of Congress with such specific and unsupported accusations. Well-known public figures joined the conversation. Hillary Clinton tweeted, "No woman in Congress or anywhere should face this kind of abuse. I stand with Jasmine Crockett." Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez reposted Crockett's statement, writing, "This isn't just defamation, it's an abuse of authority." But perhaps the most surprising comment came from Republican Senator Lisa Murkowski, who told reporters, "This demeans the presidency. Attacking elected officials like this doesn't serve the public. It deepens mistrust and fear." Meanwhile, the lawsuit itself began drawing media attention. The court filings included screenshots of the tweets, records of escalating threats, and digital forensic analysis showing a spike in coordinated online attacks mere minutes after Trump's posts. The material built a compelling chain of cause, an effect hard to dispute and deeply disturbing. Still, Crockett remained composed. She didn't tour TV networks. She didn't flood social media. She gave only one more public appearance, a Sunday morning NPR interview where she described her motivation. "This isn't about getting press," she said. "It's about safety. It's about holding people accountable. No one, including the president, is immune to the consequences of their words." Her calm, focused tone made the interview go viral. She refused to paint herself as a victim. She wasn't after pity. She wanted justice. In an era dominated by outrage and sensationalism, Crockett's restrained, deliberate approach stood out. She didn't throw insults. She didn't perform for cameras. She went to court. And for the first time since the posts were published, the focus wasn't on Trump's inflammatory rhetoric. It was on Crockett's decisive legal action. The lawsuit was officially filed at 8 a.m. on Saturday in the U.S. District Court for the District of Columbia. It spanned 42 pages, carefully constructed by Crockett's legal team, naming one defendant, Donald J. Trump, in his role as a sitting president. The central charge? Defamation with actual malice. The document highlighted 3 specific tweets from Trump's verified X account, each accusing Crockett of criminal behavior, foreign allegiance, and campaign fund misuse. All 3, the filing claimed, were false, unsupported by any verified source, and shared with malicious intent. The complaint traced the timing of Trump's post to an immediate surge in violent threats aimed at Crockett, complete with digital receipts, screenshots, metadata, and extremist forums pushing the accusations within minutes. The legal argument rested on 3 main pillars: false statements of fact. Trump's tweets didn't frame his accusations as opinion or hyperbole. They were presented as direct claims of illegal conduct, claims that were objectively false and unsupported by any official body or report. Reckless disregard for truth. Trump provided no documentation or credible basis for his charges. The lawsuit noted that no federal agency, including the Department of Justice or the Federal Election Commission, had ever opened any inquiry into Crockett's records. Intent to harm, the language, timing, and target suggested Trump's aim wasn't to inform the public, but to retaliate personally against a congresswoman who had recently challenged one of his political allies in a public hearing. The lawsuit included affidavits from Crockett's staff, Capitol Police incident reports, cybersecurity reviews, and even disturbing messages from constituents. One message, received just hours after the tweets, read, "You think being in Congress makes you untouchable? You're wrong." All of it helped build a case that Trump's rhetoric wasn't harmless political speech. It produced tangible, immediate, and dangerous results. Anticipating Trump's likely defense, the legal team addressed presidential immunity head-on. They argued that these posts were not connected to any official government function and therefore didn't fall under protected executive duties. This remains a gray area in legal proceeding, but Crockett's lawyers were prepared to argue that smearing a fellow lawmaker on social media with no factual basis doesn't qualify as a constitutional responsibility. Perhaps the most eye-catching aspect of the lawsuit was the amount requested, $100 million. That figure wasn't random. According to the legal team, it represented not only the reputational destruction and threats Crockett endured, but also a message. Influential leaders who weaponize social platforms to defame political rivals, should not be allowed to escape consequences. The formal announcement of the lawsuit reached media networks at the same time court filings became publicly accessible. Respected legal experts immediately noticed the precision of the language and the extensive scope of the documented proof. Former U.S. Prosecutor Joyce Vance described the complaint as thorough and formidable. Another constitutional analyst on PBS observed, "This isn't political theater, it's precision lawyering." Crockett's legal team, led by attorney Marcus Callahan, declined to reveal detailed legal tactics, but confirmed they were open to pursuing either full courtroom litigation or negotiating a settlement, depending on the stance taken by Trump's legal representatives. "We're fully equipped for a courtroom battle," Callahan stated, "but ultimately, this is about truth and responsibility, not spectacle." That same afternoon, the White House communications team issued a short statement. "The president will address these accusations through official legal channels. These claims are baseless. No expression of remorse, no retraction, no deletion of the original tweets." In fact, by Sunday morning, all 3 posts were still visible. Observers pointed out that keeping the tweets live could undercut any future defense, suggesting the president failed to grasp their potential damage. Crockett's attorneys included current screenshots in their filing showing the posts were still active, widely reshared, and used as justification for continuing abuse. On political news segments, the lawsuit was analyzed in real time. Could this represent a turning point in digital defamation law when directed by high-ranking government officials? Would the courts acknowledge the distinct weight of a president's public declarations online? And what would Trump's legal response be, if any? But none of those questions altered the reality for Crockett. The lawsuit had been initiated. Her position in law was firm. She wasn't chasing media attention. She was assembling a case, piece by piece, tweet by tweet, threat by threat. And the countdown for Trump's formal response had already begun. By early Monday, less than 72 hours after the suit was filed, new documentation began circulating within legal networks. Crockett's team had submitted a supplemental evidence packet to the court, strengthening the original complaint with additional detail, chronology, and a heightened sense of urgency. At the center of this filing was a minute-by-minute breakdown, a timeline aligning Trump's tweets with the chaos that erupted online. Using timestamp metadata, the filing showed that the first aggressive message aimed at Crockett was sent just 9 minutes after Trump's initial post. From there, the hostility and volume of responses surged exponentially. The forensic analysts hired by Crockett's counsel provided detailed numbers. Within the first hour, over 600 tweets or replies mentioned her name alongside words like traitor, fraud, or foreign pawn. Within 24 hours, more than 24 threats or hostile remarks appeared across platforms including X, Facebook, YouTube, and private messaging apps. By 48 hours, even Crockett's personal email, never made public, was targeted in a hacking attempt traced to an overseas IP address. Every incident was archived, labeled, and ranked in terms of severity. Crockett's attorneys understood they weren't just arguing over language, they were documenting a chain reaction, a post from the commander-in-chief, a firestorm of hostility, and the looming potential for physical danger. Among the most chilling entries in the evidence set, a voicemail. A man's voice, unidentified, left a message on a staffer's line. In it, he accused Crockett of betraying the country and warned she'd be handled the way traitors used to be. He ended with a crystal clear threat. "You think we won't get to you? We will." Alongside this audio file were screen grabs from extremist message boards where users discussed doxing her location, running up on her in public, and spreading distorted images. One picture was altered to include a rifle target over her face. Others included detailed references to her home state and congressional district, encouraging patriots in Texas to find her. This wasn't the work of scattered individuals. According to the forensics team, much of the harassment originated from well-organized networks previously tied to campaigns targeting female politicians of color. Crockett's lawyers didn't rely solely on digital content. They included police reports from both Washington, D.C., and Dallas, where her relatives had received disturbing letters and suspicious parcels. One package, flagged by staff and submitted to Capitol Police, contained an image of Crockett marked with red ink and a typed note reading, "Try faking a smile now, we're watching." Also in the supplemental filing was a sworn statement from A congressional aide describing the office's abrupt shutdown of constituent services for 2 working days to prioritize safety. Another declaration came from a cybersecurity expert who had been monitoring Crockett's digital presence prior to the tweets. His report confirmed an abnormal spike in coordinated activity timed exactly to the release of Trump's posts. His conclusion: the scale, timing, and nature of this activity directly linked back to the president's tweets. This was no coincidence. To dismantle any potential defense rooted in legitimacy, Crockett's lawyers addressed the absence of evidence in Trump's original claims. His tweets accused her of financial crimes and foreign collusion. So her legal team submitted official documentation from the Federal Election Commission, confirming she had no violations, audits, or pending investigations. They also filed copies of her tax returns and financial disclosures, all of which were clean and consistent with ethics rules. In short, Crockett's case wasn't just that the president made something up. It was that he fabricated lies that activated a measurable, coordinated campaign of fear and harassment, and every element in the case tightened that. Argument further, legal media outlets took notice. Prominent analysts began suggesting that Crockett's attorneys had not only presented a viable legal claim, but potentially a landmark one. Constitutional attorney Kimberly Akinstor, appearing on MSNBC, said, "This case isn't just about defamation. It's about redefining the legal guardrails around presidential speech and accountability in the digital era." Meanwhile, Trump stayed publicly silent. No press statements, no tweets, no interviews. But Crockett's lawsuit was growing louder with each piece of evidence submitted. Behind courthouse doors, the stack of exhibits now included voice memos, police communications, office logs, and digital audits. Outside the courtroom, public awareness of the scale and stakes was expanding fast. With every new exhibit, Crockett's legal standing became more difficult to dispute. This was no longer a political feud. It was a clear narrative of harm and responsibility. By the middle of the week, the lawsuit had become more than a personal legal action. It had grown into a symbol, a focal point for national conversation around digital attacks, public accountability, and the power of unchecked political speech. And the groundswell of support was growing. Outside the Rayburn House office building, several lawmakers, Democrats, and independents gathered beside Crockett in a rare show of unity. One by one, they delivered poignant remarks of support. Representative Ayanna Pressley, her voice unwavering, declared, "This isn't partisanship. This is about truth, security, and moral boundaries." Jasmine was deliberately targeted. Joining her were Representatives Jamie Raskin, Ilhan Omar, and Ro Khanna, each underscoring that if unchecked, this type of digital aggression from the executive branch would become routine. Raskin called it a constitutional stress test on executive overreach. Omar called it an act of digital political violence. What had begun as digital character assassination had now escalated into a national reckoning, and not just within the halls of Capitol Hill. Beyond Washington, influential organizations quickly voiced solidarity with Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett. The NAACP Legal Defense Fund issued a powerful statement praising her bravery, emphasizing that the president's remarks weren't random insults, but instead part of a broader and troubling trend, targeting bold, outspoken black women in positions of power. The National Council of Negro Women and Emily's List both released statements of support. Emily's List went a step further, offering resources for media coordination and help building grassroots visibility. Jasmine Crockett is defending more than her own name, their president said during a televised appearance. She's standing up for every woman who's ever been told to stay quiet when faced with abuse. Even legal and academic institutions weighed in not from a partisan stance, but from a civil rights and governance perspective. The Brennan Center for Justice published an in-depth legal brief outlining the significance of the case and its potential intersections with the First Amendment, presidential protections, and the evolving legal framework around online defamation. Their assessment was blunt. This lawsuit could reshape the legal landscape surrounding the abuse of digital platforms by powerful public figures. On university campuses, student-led discussions under the theme Words Matter began cropping up. At Howard University, a full lecture hall of law students dissected the constitutional stakes of the lawsuit. One student, asked why it felt so personal, responded, "Because this isn't a political ad. This is a real woman being harassed for doing her job, and it started at the top." Across social media, the narrative began to shift. Hashtags originally used to spread conspiracies like hashtag Crockett Exposed or hashtag Crockett is corrupt were reclaimed. Supporters flooded the tags with clips of her speeches, legal commentary, and posts of encouragement. New hashtags surge. Hashtag We Stand With Jasmine. Hashtag Protect Black Women shared widely by activists, influencers, and civic leaders. Famous voices added weight. Viola Davis tweeted, "This is the price of truth in public life. I'm with Jasmine Crockett." Taraji P. Henson reposted Crockett's NPR segment with the caption, "Courage, grace, strength, period." But perhaps the most impactful message came from former First Lady Michelle Obama, who wrote on Instagram, "When power is used to intimidate instead of uplift, we must speak. When language is used to endanger rather than guide, we must resist." I'm proud of Congresswoman Crockett for standing firm. The post was shared millions of times in just one day. Crockett herself remained largely off social media. She posted, "Only a single understated message. I see you. I hear you. I appreciate every one of you." Her team made it clear it was a conscious choice. The goal was to keep the spotlight on the legal process, not her personal accounts. Her press secretary confirmed that the Congresswoman was spending her days reviewing additional evidence and preparing for the next legal phase. "She's composed, focused, and unwavering," the aide said. Still, her office had to adjust quickly. Letters, emails, and voicemails poured in from across the U.S. Some came from voters. Others were from women in public service, local community leaders, or survivors of harassment who simply wanted to say thank you for refusing to be silenced. The lawsuit was still in its infancy. President Trump had yet to issue a formal reply. But one thing had become undeniably clear: Jasmine Crockett was no longer standing alone. She had sparked something larger than herself, a public conversation, a groundswell of unity, and a rising demand for accountability that couldn't be dismissed as partisan noise. And with each new voice joining the movement, her position both legally and morally grew stronger. While public momentum surged in her favor, the White House remained notably quiet, even as Crockett's case dominated headlines, attracted bipartisan praise, and won the public's attention. President Trump refrained from responding. No press conferences, no public rebuttals, and perhaps most remarkably, the original tweets that sparked the lawsuit were still visible, untouched, and just as aggressive as the day they were posted. This silence wasn't apathy, it was calculated. According to insiders familiar with the internal conversations, the lack of response was strategic. Behind closed doors, senior White House staff were divided. Some of Trump's longtime campaign advisors urged him to lean into the conflict, to frame it as another attack on free speech. But legal staffers and policy experts were deeply concerned by the seriousness of the allegations and the detailed nature of the case. Two sources connected to the White House counsels. Authors confirmed that Trump's legal team raised red flags within hours of the complaint's filing. Their worry wasn't just about bad optics, it was about substance. The inclusion of forensic analysis, documented threats, and police records suggested Crockett wasn't merely alleging defamation. She was proving a cause-and-effect chain that placed the president squarely at the center. An internal memo circulated among legal staff reportedly included this line: "There is no precedent for a defamation claim of this magnitude against a sitting president, but the legal risk is real." The White House digital media team, who typically monitored and managed the president's online activity, were also stunned by the backlash. The original plan had been to let the news cycle burn out, but by midweek, it was clear this wasn't going away. Crockett's story had captured the national mood and refused to fade. On Wednesday, Press Secretary Lisa Michaels finally faced questions during a brief press gaggle. When asked directly about the lawsuit, she replied, "The president has no comment at this time. We're confident this will be handled through the appropriate legal mechanisms." When pressed about whether Trump still stood by the tweets, Michaels gave a vague reply: "The president expresses his views as allowed under the Constitution. Beyond that, I have nothing more to share." But internal fractures were already forming. Senior aides were privately bracing for potential subpoenas, witness interviews, and possibly even testimony from staff. Their fear wasn't necessarily about losing the lawsuit, it was about what the process might unearth: timelines, drafts, and communications they didn't want made public. One looming question: who wrote or approved the tweets? Was it Trump alone? Did aides review them? Was campaign staff involved? These inquiries, if allowed in court, could open doors into the inner workings of the administration in ways no one wanted. To add to the White House's anxiety, conservative media outlets started shifting tone. While ultra-right commentators remained loyal, mainstream conservative figures showed signs of hesitation. On Fox News, Bret Baier ran a segment breaking down the lawsuit's legal basis, noting, "This isn't a throwaway case. It's comprehensive, it's fact-based, and it's built on serious documentation." The Wall Street Journal published an editorial advising the administration to treat the matter with gravity, cautioning that brushing it off could create a lasting reputational stain. Meanwhile, Republican lawmakers in Congress largely ducked the issue. A handful of hardliners dismissed it as a political stunt, but most especially key Senate and House figures avoided commenting altogether. The silence was deafening. Within legal circles, talk of presidential immunity began surfacing as Trump's likely defense, but even that wasn't guaranteed to hold. The legal defense of sitting presidents in civil suits related to official duties has long been grounded in precedent. But Jasmine Crockett's lawsuit presented a deeply complex challenge. The key legal question wasn't whether Trump could be sued in office. It was whether his inflammatory tweets qualified as presidential acts or simply personal attacks posted from a private account, even if that account carried the weight of the presidency. The blurred lines rattled even the most seasoned constitutional experts. For Crockett's legal team, the administration's refusal to respond only underscored the strength of their case. If the president had evidence, he would have shared it, said lead attorney Marcus Callahan. If he had a real defense, we'd have heard it by now. But instead, there's nothing but silence. And that silence speaks volumes. By the end of the week, it became evident the lawsuit wasn't merely surviving. It was shifting the national discourse. The White House could no longer ignore the story or brush it off as a passing media distraction. What began as a legal complaint was now dominating headlines across every major platform. Jasmine Crockett's legal action against President Trump had become the centerpiece of national political discussion, broadcasted across primetime cable, dissected in political podcasts, and debated on Sunday morning news panels. And with that attention came a change in tone. This wasn't being dismissed as partisan outrage anymore. It was being treated as a serious legal and constitutional confrontation. CNN aired an extended segment titled The Crockett Complaint, where host Abby Phillip interviewed legal scholars, civil liberties attorneys, and former legislative staffers. "We're not looking at political sniping here," Phillip said. "This is reputational sabotage, conducted from the digital bully pulpit of the presidency." MSNBC went even further. Host Joy Reid spent an entire hour breaking down the content and context of the tweets, their legal implications, and the avalanche of harassment Crockett faced afterward. She welcomed Callahan for a live interview. Calm and direct, he emphasized, "This isn't about differing views. It's about a reckless abuse of influence with real-world consequences. That's not free speech. That's deliberate, damaging defamation." Even conservative-leaning networks began addressing the gravity of the case. While some right-wing voices framed the lawsuit as political overreaction, legal commentators on Fox News adopted a more measured tone. Former judge Andrew Napolitano explained, "If the president had merely criticized her politics, that would be protected speech. But calling someone a criminal, accusing them of foreign loyalty, and alleging theft without any proof that crosses into potentially actionable defamation. And if those words lead to threats or harm, that strengthens her claim." Print outlets followed suit. The New York Times ran a front-page story titled "Can a Be Held Liable for Digital Lies?", highlighting Crockett's case as unprecedented in both clarity and documentation. The Washington Post published a feature on Crockett herself, profiling her background as a civil rights lawyer, her push for financial transparency in Congress, and the irony that she's now accused of the very corruption she's worked to fight. Inside sources told Politico and Axios that the White House had grossly underestimated Crockett's resolve and especially her public support. One anonymous staffer admitted, "We didn't think she'd push this far or find this kind of momentum. Now we're worried it'll bleed into the election cycle." Online media turned the lawsuit into a viral teachable moment. BuzzFeed News released a breakdown explaining defamation law in plain terms, drawing millions of young readers. VICE published "When Tweets Become Threats: What Crockett v. Trump Means for America," exploring the broader risks of digital harassment campaigns. Led by powerful figures, More importantly, the lawsuit began influencing a broader cultural shift around online accountability. Podcasts like Pod Save America and The Daily ran deep dives into the lawsuit's implications, while digital rights nonprofits hosted live streams on the abuse of political platforms. Amid all of this, Crockett's public image rose, though not in the usual flashy political way. She avoided viral stunts or merchandise rollouts. Her restraint became part of the narrative. She granted only 2 interviews, one with NPR, the other with PBS. Both were measured, fact-based, and devoid of personal attacks. "This isn't about ego," she said. "It's about truth, safety, and setting boundaries for how we treat people in public life." That contrast between Crockett's calm and Trump's historically aggressive online persona didn't go unnoticed. While Trump stayed oddly quiet, his usual supporters in the media struggled to mount a unified defense. Some dismissed the lawsuit as drama. Others said she was attention-seeking, but neither argument stuck. The narrative had outgrown spin. The lawsuit had become a national litmus test. How serious were Americans about protecting public officials, especially women of color, from coordinated, baseless attacks? And as coverage expanded and new stories surfaced about the ripple effects of online threats, Crockett's battle no longer felt like personal litigation. It felt like a societal turning point. On Capitol Hill, the case began dividing not just lawmakers, but donors, advocacy organizations, and voters as well. Among Democrats, the response was unequivocal. House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries released a statement condemning Trump's behavior as an assault on democratic norms and applauding Crockett's resolve. "She's defending more than herself. She's defending institutional integrity," he wrote. The Congressional Black Caucus, where Crockett holds a leadership role, swiftly issued a unified rebuke. All 58 members signed a formal letter demanding a public retraction from the president and an apology for the danger he caused. The letter, read aloud by Representative Barbara Lee on the House floor, accused Trump of deliberately endangering a colleague through misinformation. Outside the House, Democratic senators rallied as well. Elizabeth Warren, Cory Booker, and Raphael Warnock released public statements backing Crockett's right to pursue legal recourse. Even centrist Senator Joe Manchin acknowledged concern, not necessarily endorsing the $100 million suit, but warning, "We've crossed a line in our political discourse." But the true measure came from the Republican response. Among Trump loyalists, the reaction was immediate and familiar. Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene dismissed the lawsuit as left-wing theater and accused Crockett of exploiting identity politics. Sen. J.D. Vance tweeted, "Politics isn't for the thin-skinned. If she can't handle some tweets, maybe she's in the wrong profession." Yet not all Republicans followed that script. Some were noticeably restrained. When questioned about the lawsuit, Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell declined to comment altogether, a silence that in Washington speaks volumes. "I'll let the courts handle it," McConnell said tersely, a reply as brief as it was revealing. The Senate Minority Leader, rarely one to shy away from a partisan skirmish, was clearly choosing caution. His silence, more than any statement, spoke volumes. And while most Republicans kept their distance, a few voices broke ranks. Senator Lisa Murkowski, often the outlier in her party, publicly questioned Trump's motives. "I don't know what the president was hoping to achieve with those tweets, but what he did was damaging, and it certainly wasn't leadership." Representative Nancy Mace, a moderate Republican from South Carolina, also condemned Trump's rhetoric in a local radio interview. "It's just not okay to hurl baseless accusations at a colleague, especially one facing threats because of it. We should be arguing over policy, not weaponizing social media against each other." Though these Republican defections were modest in number, they carried disproportionate symbolic weight. Crockett's lawsuit was no longer just a legal case, had become a national litmus test. Would those in power remain silent when one of their own was targeted with lies? And it wasn't just lawmakers facing the heat. Major GOP donors began to quietly express concern. Several, according to Politico, were unsettled by the potential political fallout, especially among suburban women. "We're bleeding support," said one longtime Republican donor anonymously. "This kind of recklessness just pushes voters further away, especially women. It's dangerous." On the other side, Democratic fundraising efforts saw an explosion in activity. Political action committees focused on protecting women in office, launched rapid response campaigns centered on Crockett's story. Within days, Crockett's campaign reported a surge in small dollar donations and volunteer signups, particularly among women under 40, many of whom had never contributed to a political campaign before. Perhaps most notable, though, was the quiet unrest brewing among younger lawmakers in both parties. A bipartisan group of freshman representatives, many of them active online, began privately expressing anxiety that unchecked digital aggression could become the new political normal. One first-term Republican told The Hill, "What happened to her? That could happen to any of us. There's no filter anymore. No line. Just public smears and mobs on the internet." The broader political atmosphere had already been tense. But Crockett's lawsuit, built not on bluster, but on facts, legal filings, and her own calm persistence, struck a deeper nerve. This wasn't a PR stunt. It wasn't a viral clapback. It was a principled demand for accountability backed by evidence and grounded in law. And that made it harder to dismiss. For President Trump, the cost wasn't only legal, it was political. His allies were being forced to answer questions for which there were no prepared talking points. His surrogates couldn't deflect with evidence because there was none. And for once, his familiar playbook of outrage and denial had been met not with protesters or press conferences, but with a quiet, forceful lawsuit from a Congresswoman who simply refused to be silenced. By the end of the second week, it was clear that something had shifted, not necessarily in court, but in the public consciousness. What began as a headline had turned into a cultural inflection point. Americans weren't just watching. They were participating. A new Reuters Ipsos poll released 10 days after the lawsuit's filing found that 62% of respondents believed the president had gone too far. Among independents, that number rose to a striking 69%. Even 28% of Republicans admitted discomfort with Trump's tweets and said they wished he would tone down his online behavior. Meanwhile, Crockett's national profile soared. Her approval ratings climbed, especially in urban and suburban districts. With high percentages of professional women and younger voters, her website saw a 36% spike in traffic. Emails of support poured in. Many came from people who'd never heard her name until this case, but now saw her as a model of calm strength in a political world dominated by chaos. Not all messages came from political elites. Some were from nurses, postal workers, teachers, veterans. One 56-year-old postal worker in Ohio wrote, "You're the first person I've seen in a while who stood up without yelling. You didn't make it about you. You just said, 'That's a lie,' and went to court. That's what strength looks like." Online platforms began reflecting that shift. TikTok creators began breaking down the case, highlighting the clarity of the evidence and Crockett's composed demeanor. One viral video titled, "This is how you check a bully with receipts," hit 3 million views in just 2 days. Another creator stitched together Trump's accusatory tweets and Crockett's press conference under the caption, "He raged, she filed." On X, where the controversy began, the tide turned dramatically. Trump's original post had sparked an avalanche of memes, mockery, and threats. Now, they were being drowned out by screenshots of court documents, fact checks, and testimonials. Hashtags once used to spread conspiracy theories, like hashtag Crockett exposed dash, were repurposed by supporters flooding the site with praise and legal commentary. Civil rights activists, particularly those focused on protecting black women in public life, began rallying behind her. A grassroots movement emerged under the hashtag Protect Her Seat, featuring profiles of women lawmakers who had endured digital abuse. Crockett's face led the campaign not as a symbol of victimhood, but of resilience. In churches, on college campuses, in civic centers, people were having new conversations. In Atlanta, a town hall titled "Free Speech or Targeted Harm" brought together lawyers, journalists, and community leaders to examine how tweets can trigger real-world danger. Crockett's case had turned the constitutional gray zone into a national teach-in. Back in D.C., Crockett stayed measured. Her public appearances were few and her words deliberate. In a brief CNN interview, when asked how the spotlight had affected her, she replied, "I'm not interested in becoming a celebrity plaintiff. I'm interested in telling the truth and staying safe. That's it." That comment resonated across the internet, especially with women in leadership who had endured their own harassment. Behind closed doors, lawmakers from both sides began discussing potential reforms protocols to address online threats and legal tools for defamation defense while in office. And still, from Trump, silence. No tweet, no retraction, no defense, just silence. The original tweets remain live, untouched. But with every passing day, that silence began to look less like confidence and more like avoidance. Legal observers noted that the clock for a formal response was ticking, and with each moment of inaction, Crockett's case grew stronger. Public opinion, once deeply fractured, began coalescing around a rare point of consensus. This had gone too far, even among Trump supporters. There was unease not necessarily with his politics, but with the recklessness of the attack. And many were watching closely. What began as a smear campaign was now a national reckoning about truth, power, and the limits of speech when it comes from the highest office in the land. Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett didn't pick this fight, but when it came to her doorstep, she met it with dignity, evidence, and the rule of law in America. America noticed.